All right, so remember our bottom line today is that Sabbath sets us free to stop, rest, delight, and worship.
Yep, and so in this last week, we're looking at the story of Nehemiah, and I think this is an interesting passage of scripture for us to bat around for several reasons as we wrap up this series. But the context there is that God's people had been exiled, and he called them back, but they were having trouble getting established back in the land that he had promised them again. The walls of Jerusalem were torn down was a big reason, and there just wasn't any stability or anything there. And so the whole story of Nehemiah, if you go back and read through the earlier chapters of the book, is about him seeking permission to go and help lead this rebuilding of the walls to restore Israel into some kind of a decently secure position there in Jerusalem so they can once again take up residence in a real and meaningful way and begin to experience life like they had dreamed and hoped for so long. So after 70 years of exile, here they are, and Nehemiah's got the walls rebuilt, and he's looking around and seeing that they have become in many ways a lawless people. They've forgotten God's law. They've been gone so long and away from, in these pagan cultures, have been surrounding them for so long that they've forgotten a lot of the habits and the rules that were supposed to govern their Jewish life together. So he begins to reform and to bring and restore some of those things. And so one of those was Sabbath. And this passage we talked about and read about today talks about some of the ways that he reinstituted and made sure, like, hey guys, we've got to do this right. So, they had been in the custom of working 7 days a week because that was the culture they came from. And so they were just buying and selling stuff on the Sabbath just like they did every other day of the week. And he was like, it's got to stop. And so they did stop, and he closed the city gates and said, like, which is where all that marketplace kind of stuff often happened in ancient cultures, was at the gates. Closed them, not doing it. And one of the things that was interesting to me then is that you've got these foreigners who had traveled to Jerusalem to sell their goods and their food and all that kind of thing. And Nehemiah is this image of him like looking over the gates at people and be like, hey, sorry, you're not getting in, and don't come back on Sabbath. That was kind of a different world for them to wrap their minds around.
Right. Yeah, there is it seems extreme. I mean, bar the gates, right? We are going to definitively demonstrate that we will honor the Sabbath day, that we will keep it holy. It is a day set apart.
Yep.
And that was so core to their identity as the people of God that there had to be extreme measures put into place. And that is a challenge to me. I remember hearing a sermon about this when I was at my brother-in-law's church one Sunday, and Courtney and I had started practicing Sabbath more intentionally. And so again, I want to just first of all differentiate there again that Sabbath is not just church attendance. I mean, Courtney and I both have grown up as people who have barely ever missed Sunday church. I mean, that was the kind of homes we grew up in. That was the priority of our families. And then, of course, by virtue even of being in ministry, that's been a part of our custom. But really, up until a couple of years ago, more intentionally practicing Sabbath, of which the gathering with the believers was only a component of what that bigger picture of Sabbath was. And so we had started to really try to practice this more intentionally, and then of course got lazy, which I think there's part of that going on in this story too. Yeah. There was security again. Oh, the wall is up. We can kind of sink back into a little bit more of a feeling of peace and affluence, and there's something about peace and affluence that makes us less hungry for God, and his ways sometimes. True. And so anyways, we had found ourselves kind of slipping back into old habits. And I remember going to my brother-in-law's church, and his pastor was preaching this text, actually wrapping up a whole series they've done through Nehemiah. And those words kind of like resonated in me of, Like they slammed the gate shut and locked it. Like sometimes we have to draw a line in the sand is what that says to me. Like it may be something extreme where we really say no, like just like have to say no. Like this day is too important to our souls, to the well-being of our family, to our part in the kingdom of God, that we're gonna do something extreme here to like define that this is a part of our identity.
I'm guessing that if y'all are anything like us, that there has to be some degree of that, or else it's gonna slip away in this life. Like the culture we live in, it's like if I don't calendar it, if I don't protect it, sometimes even if I do calendar it, it just gets like nibbled away at by the stuff that seeps into this life, and we're constantly being pulled into more things, and sometimes we even say yes to something that we don't think will conflict, only to find that it does later, and we're like, how did I get myself into this situation where this isn't what I wanted? Like this happens to our schedules all the time, and it can certainly happen to Sabbath all the time. So it's kind of is like you. I haven't really been practicing it intentionally, except for I don't know the last few years off and on, and so I'm just in that little bit of practice. I find that to really do it well is a challenge and something I have to fight for, but also something so worth fighting for.
Right. And it takes ongoing experimentation and trial and error, and weeks where you're successful and weeks where you fail, and all of those things. I mean, we're still on that journey, very much so. In this, it's not easy in a culture, right, that does not honor Sabbath, which is what they're experiencing here in Nehemiah. But I do think that it's easy to kind of see the harshness almost of Nehemiah, or only see the harshness in this. But again, there's that reframing. I say no to these things so that I can say yes to these things, which goes to the bottom line, right? Nehemiah was saying we're closing the gates to commerce and to these different things. We're saying no to these things so that we are freed to rest and not be a people who are enslaved to our work 7 days a week, but get a day to be with family and to rest in God's goodness and his provision, and to recognize he's the one ordering and moving this world, and we're going to worship him and give gratitude to him on this day. So again, it's that we're freed. Sabbath frees us to say yes to so many good things that we're actually saying no to when the gates of our lives are just always open to anyone and everyone and everything every day.
Yep. Well, and these four elements of Sabbath, stopping and delighting and resting and worship, these are not things that are common in our culture. And I remember, you've said earlier in this series that it's like all these habits, it's like we're swimming against the current of culture. And Sabbath is definitely one of those that, as rich as it is and as good as, you can have like the greatest Sabbath and then the next week find that it's hard to make it happen again because it's just this current that's like you're swimming against, and our culture, just none of these things are going with the current of culture. And so it's one of those things where there may have to be some, and it's worth noting that we're probably going to inconvenience some people when we Sabbath well. Like it probably will. It'll affect the people certainly in our home that we live with. It'll affect probably our friends, but maybe even the community beyond that to some level. And some of that may feel inconvenient to them. Some of it they may not even notice, but I think it can also have a good impact, wouldn't you say, on culture?
I mean, I would hope so, and I would hope that we learn, and even pray for, that we're carrying this practice with the Spirit of Jesus, so if we're saying no to someone or an event, that we're not doing it from this self-righteous Pharisaical, standpoint. That doesn't really do a lot of good.
Yes, I'll be Sabbathing.
Sorry, I'm actually, a Christian. That's not the idea. But, being able to say, I'm sorry, we would love to do that, Maybe on another day we could do that, but we just have a practice, to really rest together as a family.
You've said no to stuff before, like even with your kids' involvement and stuff, because it got in the way of something of worship or whatever, that was a high value for you. And I've talked to other families that have too.
Yeah.
Like it's a real thing we have to do sometimes.
It to me, like when we've done that, specifically with things that involve our children, and it was really hard for, our oldest child, that we've had to do this with on a couple of occasions, to accept that she was not going to be a part of that event. But it also opened the door to really like deep moments of teaching and forging our family identity. I keep coming back to that word today with this, like it's defining, like this is just going to be a part of who we are. And it's not even because we're trying to put on some weird kind of holiness costume or whatever. But it's like, it is a part of our identity, because going back to the beginning of this series, we were created actually to live in this rhythm. So we're just trying to recover who we actually were created to be. And to do that is not always easy or natural, though. It actually takes, a lot of effort and making some hard choices, and sometimes just closing those gates.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great week to have some really real and raw conversations with each other about what makes this hard and what you love about it, and just all this stuff that we've wrestled with as we look at this passage in Nehemiah. So have fun discussing that together.
Yeah.